everyone, and welcome back to the Museum Show and Tell Show. I am Nicole, the host, and I'm here with Jan from the Penetanguishene Museum and Genevieve from the Huronia Museum.
Hello.
So in today's episode, Genevieve did challenge us to find something church related, whether it was about the church or someone in the congregation. And so what do you have for us for today?
I have brought in, these are very exciting. Now there are a lot of churches in Huronia, and there were historically a lot of churches in town. And not only did they, I guess, provide for the spiritual nourishment of their congregations, but they also were very socially active in towns. I know there were a lot of, say, picnics, fowl suppers, Bible study groups. There were a lot of fundraisers for causes within the church, but also missionary groups outside of the church. There were baseball teams, hockey teams, a lot of extracurricular activities. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about today, in a way. I have brought in, it's called the News Bag. They're a series of newsletters that were written by the Young People's Guild at Knox Presbyterian Church in Midland during the First World War. The first one was published in 1916. They were also, interestingly, they also took up the High Y News Bag, it was called, during the Second World War. So it's really nice to see that they continued on with this really important publication. And what it was just a really short newsletter of the goings on in town, in the area, really. And it was sent to, I'm not entirely sure whether it was sent to just the congregants, the male congregants who were serving in the Canadian military or the Air Force, whatever there was of the Air Force, or in the Navy at the time who were serving overseas, or whether it was open to all young men from the area. But anyway, it's really, really interesting. It provides a lot of information on what was going on in the church and what was going on in town. A lot of sort of gossipy news about maybe young men who had married, or work that was going on at the munitions plants. Sometimes it's a little bit of other men that were serving overseas. For instance, we've got some information that William Towers had been killed in action. That was by September 1917. But what's really, really interesting, I think, about this is that they're kind of irreverent. Of course, they were written by young people, and that's something that you can see throughout history, that teenagers tend not to take things very seriously. I mean, they can be serious, but oftentimes they're not. So there's a lot of humor that's been injected into these newsletters, which of course you want to keep the tone light when you're sending out news to young men who are in a very serious situation, I guess. But that is something that's really interesting. I think that a lot of people tend to think that Christians are sort of devoid of humor. So it's really neat to think, I mean, is it really, just because you're a Christian doesn't mean that you are humorless, and the two are not mutually exclusive. So that was a really interesting thing to see when I read these newsletters, that the kids were really lots of fun. I mean, I've got in the first newsletter they wrote here, this weather somehow recalls fowl suppers, and sure enough, the shop windows display an invitation to one at Wybridge. If you were only home, we'd go. Does the mention of such things stir up recollections of high times? Have you ever been to Ebenezer or Waverley or Wybridge, to just such a supper when the bad Midland boys played baseball with the harvest decorations, shied apples, chicken bones, and pieces of real good pumpkin at each other and everybody? Who was it got a nice, ripe, juicy tomato in the ear? I wonder if Ed Gladstone and Lorne Lockhart and a few more of you will recall that incident. And do you remember during the concert when one of the fellows of your acquaintance tried to orate how you applauded too well all the time he tried to do it? Oh, of course not. You didn't do anything of the kind. Certainly not. By no means. Perish the thought. So anyway, it reminds me a lot of the teenagers that I know that are actually living in my house today. So it's just full of levity, and it's lots of fun to see.
Yeah, that's really neat that it's written from the teenager's point of view during that time. And yeah, when you say that like Christians aren't really known for their sense of humor, but I think if you look at the time, the majority of the population in this area would have been Christian as well, right? So it is
belong to some sort of
some sort of church. So yeah, that's kind of interesting. I'd love to read some of those just to see some of the names that are in there, right? So great to see.
Now the churches are crying for anyone to come through their doors, let alone teenagers. Times have really changed.
It's been really difficult to a lot of people are. It's unfortunate.
All right, so for us, I don't know if you can guess what our artifact is, but what we have here is we have a model of St. James on the Lines Church, which is one of the churches here in Penetanguishene. So it was, it's actually the Anglican church, and it was the old garrison church for the military and naval establishments. So the reason it was built is because we had where Discovery Harbor is now, we had the military and naval establishments there. And once the military came, they realized that they needed to have sort of church setting for them to go, because there was a lot of drinking happening and, a lot of bad behavior happening. And they thought maybe it would be a good idea to bring God or to have something else. Also, some of them were bringing their wives, to the establishments, and they wanted to have a place because, church was really the center of your social life for anybody in a community. And so by the 1830s, they decided that they really wanted to build a church in town. And I think in 1836 is when the land was donated on Church Street. And by 1840, it had opened. And the first minister there was Father Halland. And you might know the Halland because Mary Halland did a lot of sketches that are of the military establishments, and they are at the Huronia Museum, and I absolutely love those sketches, the originals. We have copies, but you have some of the originals. So this is a model that was actually built in the 1950s, and it was built by the inmates, not the inmates, but the patients at the what was known as the Ontario Hospital, mental hospital here in town. It's now called the Waypoint Center for the Mental Health. And so it is, two sides. It's very interesting in there to look inside. And if you've been in the church, you can see it looks exactly the way it was. And one of the interesting things about this church is that it has a very wide aisle in the middle. And the reason it's wide is because it would have to be wide enough for four soldiers to march abreast in when they came in. And also an interesting to note about this church, which is probably very similar to a lot of other churches, is when you walk in, the pews are a little bit wider at the front versus at the back. And that's because usually you were donating to your church, and those that paid a little bit more got to be at the front. And those that did not have as much money were at the back. And you can even see that they did that in here as well. And they actually have a picture of the priest that was here at the time in the 1950s, standing there. And over here, they've got the little choir outfits that you would have had. And this is just a really, interesting piece to tell the history of the church, as well as for little kids to come and step up on the step stool to look inside. And this is interesting enough. This is our oldest church in town. Even though St. Anne's Church dates back to 1832, that was just a very small log cabin. And the St. Anne's Church that we have today was built in the 1900s. But this building here is an Ontario Heritage Trust site. And if you go there on Church Street, it was built in 1840. And so it's quite a marvel even for churches in Ontario, early churches. It was called St. James on the Lines because it was on the lines of communication between the garrison, the military, the naval and military establishments, and town. So if you go along Church Street, it's exactly in the middle of where the main town would have been, which is the main street, and where the military and naval establishments are. So that is our artifact for today.
Fantastic.
So for our next showing, we've decided, because the Christmas holidays are coming up and we're quite busy, and we're closed between Christmas and New Year's. Are you closed between Christmas and New Year's at the Huronia Museum?
We're open.
Open. Okay, great. So, well, we're closed, but you're open. So we do encourage you to come and visit the Huronia Museum during Christmas break. We decided that this will be our last one until the new year. And then so everybody who loves to watch our show, come back the first week of January, we'll be back. And anybody who's fallen behind, you can catch up on all of our videos and be ready for the new year. And Jan, do you have our theme for the new year?
I have our theme for the new year, and our theme for the new year is going to be, well, we're going into the new year, which you're supposed to start afresh. You're supposed to feel good. So let's just pick an artifact that makes you feel good when you look at it.
Oh, that's a nice theme. Okay. Yeah. All right, that should be a good video to come back to. So we wish everybody happy holidays. We hope that you are safe and well. Keep safe, and we'll see you in the new year. Bye.
Merry Christmas,
Bye, everyone.